The 50-year-old king was clearly not thrilled at the prospect of remarrying. His chosen bride was a 23-year-old German princess, nicknamed the Mecklenburg Venus. No one could have guessed that this marriage would be doomed from the start. The court faction exerted strong pressure on the Prussian king to persuade him to marry for the third time. Frederick had only one heir from his second marriage. The responsibility for continuing the dynasty rested on his son, Crown Prince Frederick William, and his wife Sophia Dorothea. But what if the couple were to face difficulties in producing heirs? With a sigh, Frederick resigned himself to the necessity of marriage. Without much deliberation, he agreed to yet another union. Time was of the essence. The groom was no longer young, and so he was not particularly picky in choosing a bride. He settled on a Protestant young woman from northern Germany, Sophia Louise of the House of Mecklenburg-Schwerin-Grabow. She was already 23 years old, and despite her angelic beauty, no suitable husband had yet been found for her. Sophia Louise lived in relatively modest circumstances. She received no special education and was raised as a strict Lutheran. Her father, Duke Frederick of Mecklenburg-Schwerin-Grabow, died when she was just 3 years old, so the young princess grew up at the court of her elder brother, Frederick William, who was 10 years her senior. Little is known about Sophia Louise's childhood, but by all accounts, it was not an easy one. Money was scarce, entertainment was frowned upon by the pious residents of Schwerin, and family and political disputes poisoned the atmosphere at court. When the entourage of the Prussian king arrived at the court in Schwerin, they did not hesitate to give their consent to the marriage of their princess. Naturally, the young woman's own opinion was not sought. After all, who could have guessed that Sophia Louise would one day become Queen of Prussia? The bride and groom barely knew each other, not even through the flattering portraits typically exchanged before royal engagements. Sophia Louise's consent was a mere formality, and Frederick showed no interest in the fact that his future wife was called the Mecklenburg Venus. She was of childbearing age, and that was all that mattered at the time. This ill-matched pair might have avoided much sorrow had the marriage not been arranged so hastily. The people of Berlin eagerly awaited the arrival of their new queen, but what they saw hardly inspired delight. A slender young woman with delicate features, waving from her carriage with a stiff expression and wooden movements, came across as cold and unapproachable. In truth, she possessed neither charm nor warmth. During her first public meeting with Frederick, she shocked everyone by dropping to her knees before her husband, making herself the laughingstock of the court. Even her ladies-in-waiting smirked at her uncertainty in matters of etiquette, keenly aware of their social advantage over the young queen and making sure she felt it. The truth was, no one had prepared Sophia Louise for her new role, and she had no one to support or guide her. Little comfort came from her husband's polite yet distant demeanor, especially since the crown prince and his wife openly displayed their contempt for the new queen. Sophia Dorothea's grandmother, no friend to the recently crowned queen, wrote to her granddaughter, "You ought to deal her a firm blow from the very start, for if you allow her to establish herself, she will cause you no end of trouble and soon gain the upper hand." It didn't take a firm blow to intimidate Sophia Louise. The atmosphere of alienation, silence, cutting remarks, and mockery that surrounded her at court was enough. The one thing that might have improved her standing, a pregnancy, seemed increasingly unlikely. Before long, news spread about a secret conversation between the Prussian king and his personal physician. Rumors circulated that the king lamented those who believed he was still capable of a full marriage at his age and given his health. Sophia Louise did not become pregnant, and over the next few years, many watched from a distance, coldly and mercilessly, as the young queen slowly withered away at court. She had no one to talk to, no one to confide in, except for her lady-in-waiting, Countess von Grevenitz, who had accompanied Sophia Louise from Schwerin to Berlin. However, rather than comforting the unhappy queen and lifting her spirits with light conversation, von Grevenitz tormented her mistress with psalms and biblical verses, insisting on prayer and repentance. It was said that in her youth, Grevenitz had led a lively life, but as she aged, her preferences changed to the complete opposite. Nevertheless, Sophia Louise was dependent on her fanatical lady-in-waiting, a narrow-minded Lutheran who constantly urged the young queen to convert her husband to the true faith, warning that otherwise the Prussian king would never attain eternal bliss. Sophia Louise, in turn, longed more than anything for that very bliss. When Sophia Louise arrived in Prussia, the Pietists had a significant influence on many people. The queen fell under the sway of this movement, which rejected all the joys of life, such as music, dancing, and attending comedies, deeming them sinful and detrimental to salvation. While many held a different view, the condemnation of worldly pleasures was just one aspect of Pietism that completely engulfed Sophia Louise's world. The movement's focus on helping the poor, providing social welfare, creating jobs, and reforming education did not interest the pious queen. She was solely concerned with the salvation of her soul, believing that her husband, remaining in the Reformed faith, was endangering both himself and her. It was no surprise that Frederick increasingly distanced himself from his peculiar wife. Arguments erupted between the couple, during which Sophia Louise would call her husband a sinner doomed to eternal damnation unless he accepted the true Lutheran faith. Yet Frederick was not the type to lead a frivolous life either. He even issued a decree banning walks, gambling, and drunkenness. Sophia Louise withdrew entirely from court life and transformed her chambers in the castle into a monastic cell, accessible only to her trusted lady-in-waiting, Countess von Grevenitz. Naturally, efforts were made to conceal the Prussian queen's peculiar behavior as much as possible, but court gossip proved impossible to fully suppress. Word of Sophia Louise's eccentricities even reached Hanover. "It seems to me," wrote Sophia of Hanover to her granddaughter Sophia Dorothea, "that your queen is no longer in the king's favor. I have been told the king himself admitted that the queen has never caused him as much grief as she has now." It goes without saying that the Berlin royal court had no desire to publicize the details of the Prussian queen's life. Queen Sophia Louise became increasingly isolated from everyone around her. Frederick, convinced that her pious lady-in-waiting von Grevenitz was the source of all her troubles, finally reached his limit and resolved to remove her from the Berlin court. The countess was sent back to Schwerin, but this only made the situation worse. Deprived of her only confidant, the queen sank into a deep melancholy. Her condition deteriorated, and her depression escalated into frequent bouts of religious mania. Her mental anguish manifested in fits of wild delirium, desperate weeping, or loud, hysterical laughter for no apparent reason. At times, she would sing for hours with her eyes closed or sit completely apathetic, unresponsive to her surroundings. Sophia Louise was placed under strict supervision. She was not permitted to move freely and could only leave her rooms when accompanied by a lady-in-waiting. The Prussian king, who had long been suffering from his own ailments, attempted to conceal his wife's worsening state. However, he scarcely saw Sophia Louise and evidently did not grasp the severity of her mental and physical decline. Their final meeting occurred under tragic circumstances. During one of her fits, Sophia Louise escaped her guards. In a hysterical state, she ran through the castle corridors in a long white nightgown, trying to reach her royal husband's chambers. In her desperation, she either failed to see a glass door or deliberately smashed through it, severely cutting herself on the shattered glass. Bloodied and in complete distress, she nevertheless reached Friedrich's chambers and found him asleep in his armchair. The moment the king awoke, he saw her figure and, terrified, believed he was face to face with the White Lady, the ghost of the House of Hohenzollern said to appear just before a king's death. Friedrich cried out, and his servants rushed to him, seizing Sophia Louise and carrying her back to her rooms. They tried to calm the frightened king by explaining what had actually happened. There and then, Friedrich resolved to part with his mentally ill wife as soon as possible and ordered that Sophia Louise be sent back to Schwerin. Word of this reached even Hanover. No matter how hard they tried to conceal the truth in Berlin, the incredible story of the White Lady leaked out, and rumors of the Mad Queen spread, not only through court circles, but across all of Prussia. Now everyone knew there was a Mad Queen in the royal household. The queen was sent to her mother in Schwerin just a few days later. Sophia Louise returned to her mother, and 1 month after that, Friedrich passed away at the age of 55 in the royal palace in Berlin. Sophia Louise lived with her mother in Schwerin for another 23 years, never regaining her sanity. Her tragic life came to an end due to heart disease. She was buried in the Nikolaikirche in Schwerin, making her the only Prussian queen who did not find her final resting place in Berlin or Potsdam. With her exile from Berlin, she effectively vanished from history. The only remaining mention of her was a dry entry in court documents stating that Her Majesty remains unfit to manage her own affairs. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.